The Gospel according to Luke chapter 4.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus began to say to all in the synagogue of Nazareth, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" But Jesus replied to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you do in Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. The truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up, and heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to the widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian.' When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove Jesus out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But Jesus passed them in the midst of them and went on his way." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. In our Gospel reading for today, Jesus is having sort of a homecoming. It is very early on in his ministry. He has gone out and he has done some very miraculous things. He's gotten noticed and word has spread. And after his first miraculous events and actions and different miracles, Jesus is coming home for the very first time. Now, Jesus grew up in Nazareth. And if you don't know, Nazareth was a very small town. There was 400 or 500 people there, maybe. 40 to 50 families tops. And you all know what small town life is like, don't you? Everybody knows each other. They're not just your kids. Everybody plays a role in raising your kids up. Kids run around, but it's a safe area. Lots of gossiping, but then there's lots of big community activities. We all get together for a barbecue or whatever, right? And everybody knows everything about everybody else for the most part, right? That's small town life. Well, Jesus has come back to Nazareth, his small town, and these are his people, his tribe. These are the people he grew up with, where he ran around and played games with. Remember, his father was the town carpenter, so Jesus probably went around and built tables and helped out and built people's barns and things like that. He's intimately connected with all of these people. And they know Jesus. He's one of their own. So he comes home, and on the first Sabbath day, he goes to the synagogue, which is custom. And in this small, very kind of one-room synagogue, I mean, the entire synagogue would fit in the space of about 10 of these pews. I've been in the synagogue. It's not very big. So Jesus is there, and as is custom, one of the adult men are going to get up and read some of the scriptures each week according to their schedule. And they had a schedule just like we do for which scriptures were read on which Sabbath day. And so he gets up to do his reading. He's back and he's been gone for a while, so naturally they're going to ask him to get up and read. They give him a scroll, part of Isaiah, and Jesus reads it, and it's a famous part of Isaiah that's talking about the Messiah. And after he's done reading, he rolls up the scroll, hands it back, and then he proclaims to them, "Today, in your presence, this prophecy, it has come true." And at first, everybody's stunned. No one says anything. You can imagine like the And then they start saying some nice things about Jesus. Of course, they have an ulterior motive. They want something from Jesus. And you know how human nature is, right? When you want something from somebody, what do? You say something nice to them. You kind of stroke their ego a little bit. And so they at first are amazed, and they say, "Wow, imagine these gracious words that he says. Isn't this the son of Joseph the carpenter? Wow, what a big boy he's grown up into." That kind of stuff, right? But Jesus knows what they're after. As he's demonstrated all throughout his ministry, he can read people's hearts, knows what's going on inside. And Jesus, as his habit, He cuts right to the point. He just avoids the chitter-chatter, goes straight to what they're thinking in their hearts, what they really want from him. So he calls out the elephant in the room, he brings it up. He's not afraid to broach subjects. And he says, surely you guys want to say to me, and quote that scripture, healer, doctor, heal thyself. Give us some of the love, Jesus. Because that's what they want in their hearts. They've heard about the miraculous things that Jesus is doing, and they're thinking to themselves, well, he's one of us. He's our guy. Certainly when he comes, he's going to throw a little, our way, an extra whatever. We want to have some extra gold and joy and healing, and we want to live a little, right? Certainly we get to experience some of this power that Jesus has been demonstrating in Capernaum and in other places, in the big cities. What about us, Jesus? We're your people. And they want him to share the wealth. What's interesting is that instead of doing that, Jesus quotes a couple of stories, very famous stories. These are the kind of stories that we're told to little kids as they're growing up. It's part of the lore of the community. It's part of the legends even. It's the stuff that you repeat at holidays and at celebrations. Everybody knows these stories. And Jesus repeats them, but he points out something that's kind of glossed over. You see, in the times, in each of these stories that Jesus points out to them, there are times when there were needy people in Israel, but God chose to both give grace and a miracle and to use a foreigner instead. To use the other person, the outsider, instead of one of God's own people in Israel. And Jesus points this out to them. And immediately, they're enraged. They're angry. They're not just upset angry where you're going to spout off a little bit. They're over-the-top angry because what do? They grab Jesus, they haul him out of the synagogue, they walk up the hill that's right there in the middle that the town's built on. They go up to a cliff and they're like, you're in, you're done for, we're going to kill you. Imagine that. His own people, the people that he knew well, the people he grew up with, the people who he had intimate connections with, they're going to kill Jesus. How ludicrous does this sound? How in the world? I mean, they had to know Jesus well, right? They had to have known he was perfect, that he was lovable, that he could do... Right? I mean, they knew Jesus. And they're going to kill him. How in the world? And we're not talking about a mob of people here. We're talking about his own family, his extended neighbors. There's nobody else except for his own people that are present in that synagogue because it was a small town. And they're going to kill him. And it seems outrageous. It seems tragic. It seems unbelievable. Why do they think? How could they be so angry? We can suppose, but it probably comes down to this. They're angry and upset and jealous because Jesus is helping out the other, the people who are not part of their group, instead of them. And their lives are so consumed about their own needs, their own wants, their own desires, and the fact that Jesus is going to give them all that they want, that they're willing to kill Jesus instead. To kill the very thing that might bring hope and peace and miracles and power into their lives. They're going to kill it if they can't get it. They can't get Jesus on their own terms. What's interesting is the response that Jesus gives to them. The people that are betraying him, and you know this, those who you are closest to, when they betray you, when they try and kill you, it cuts the deepest, right? The rejection hits you in your soul. It tears you apart. So what does Jesus do? What does he not do, actually? Because all Jesus basically does is ignore them. He just kind of walks in their midst, turns on the ghost thing, whatever that is, I don't know, and ignores them and leaves. He doesn't condemn them. He doesn't call down judgment, fire, and brimstone upon them. Oh, yeah, you're going to kill me? Let me show you what I can really do. He doesn't do that. There's no sentencing them to everlasting punishment. There's no condemnation. There's no ridicule. There's no guilt. There's nothing. He just simply walks away and ignores them. You know, as we read this story, and as we might be overwhelmed with it, I always ask myself the question, who am I in this story? Because I always wanted to picture myself as, loyal people that follow Jesus, his disciples, right? But I think, as I look at Christianity in America, we are much more similar as a church, as a broad church, to the people who live in Nazareth than we are to the people who follow Jesus. Both because Jesus' attitude has a message to say both to that local community in Nazareth and to the greater nation of Israel, as this story is repeated over and over again wherever Jesus went and by his disciples long after Jesus has left earth. And the message to that local community and to the bigger nation of Israel is this: if you are so self-centered, so caught up with yourself, God's just going to ignore you and look for the people that are willing to connect with God. Post-Jesus, post the death and resurrection of Jesus, there is no more condemnation. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that God's going to give us what we want. God's simply going to ignore us and move on to where those people who are open to what God wants to do. Locally, that means that we have many churches, partially including Alpine, that are so caught up in their own needs and what they do and how God's got to do the work put into their plan that God's just moving on. God's just ignoring them. That's the reality that maybe some people might come to. And then we can look nationally, and the best example of how this is working in this nation is this whole thing about building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. Latest statistics says that most Christians in America support the building of this wall, a majority of them. And I don't want to get into the politics of should we or shouldn't we, except for the fact that the wall, as we build it, is not going to protect America. It's not going to keep out anybody who is evil, because the evil people, or all the people that are going to do all bad stuff, they have power, they have ways to get into the country anyway. What the wall is going to do is it's going to keep out those people who have nothing. Those people whom we don't want to have to provide health insurance for. Those people whom we don't want to have to provide schools and care for or share our abundance with. That's what's going to happen. And think about this one question. If we build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, where do you think Jesus is going to choose to live? On the side of those who have, who are trying to keep what they have, or on the side of those who have nothing? Yet, as a church, as a nation, what do? Are we more similar to Israel, who's willing to take hold of Jesus and toss him off a cliff because we don't like that we don't get all that we feel that we deserve? Now, the good news for all of us today is that the response that God has, even though there is not condemnation, and there is no condemnation, there is no judgment, because all judgment happened at the cross. So even though there is no condemnation in our lives, there is something that is important. There is always invitation. God always is inviting us to put aside our selfishness, to take up our lives and say, hey, I want to make my life about what God is doing, not what I'm doing. There is always grace, and there is always an invitation to say, yeah, God, I want to get on board. And I'm not going to define for you what that looks like. Part of having faith is discovering for yourself what it looks like when you get on board with what God wants to have happen in your life instead of your own personal agenda. These are harsh words. This is a difficult passage because we see the reality of people who knew Jesus intimately choosing to throw him off a cliff. And the people in our country today who know Jesus intimately, who know Jesus well, is the Church of Jesus. It's our church. It's the Christian church. We're the ones that know Jesus. We're the ones most similar to the townspeople of Nazareth. And the good news always is there is no condemnation, but always invitation. Invitation. Invitation to join in what God is already doing in the midst of our world, helping to share this glorious good news. And in the midst of that invitation, there's always blessing as well. God is always bestowing blessing. If we need something, God gives it to us, not so that our needs can be fulfilled, so that we can share it with others. If we need safety, God provides security, not for us to hoard for ourselves, but for us to use for those who are truly vulnerable. If we need confidence, God's more than willing to be on our side, to stand up beside us, to bear with us our pains and our burdens. One thing that we cannot choose to do is to make life all about ourselves. The invitation is there, and it stands. Amen? Amen. Our takeaways for today. Jesus ignores his own people when they are consumed with self-centeredness. That is what happened back then. You can interpret whether or not you think it'll happen today. The next takeaway is the good news for all of us is that even when there's no condemnation, there's always invitation to join with what God is already doing. Let's stand for our song of the day.